Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. I'm going to begin by telling you something that you already know. I love Julio Cortázar. I want to share my Cortázar collection with you. So that's what we're going to do. I just want to tell you one little thing about the approach. What I'm going to do is I'm going to divide his works by genre, and then I'm going to go by chronology in the sense of what works were published first. One of the reasons why I do this genre approach, is because Cortázar, as you may know, is one of those authors who tried his hand at every possible genre that you can imagine, and even then there are works by him that do not fall under any of the categories that we have. So that's basically what we're doing right now. I hope you enjoy this literary journey, the works of Julio Cortázar. Let's check it out. The first novel that Cortázar published was Los Premios, or The Winners, from 1960. This is a novel about traveling. It's about a journey, about a group of people in a cruise and how their lives become entangled and intertwined. And it was really a test for Cortázar. What he wanted to see was if he could go from being a short story writer to being a novelist, which, as you know, sometimes is a difficult passage. Cortázar himself said that he had passed the test, not with a very high grade, but he said it was good enough. There's an afterword in this one in which Cortázar says that those of his readers who expect something similar to this novel in the future might be disconcerted. And to prove the point in the best possible way, the next novel that Cortázar gave us was, of course, Rayuela, or Hopscotch, from 1963. This timeless story about expats living in Paris that actually needs no introduction. Many readers love it, many readers hate it, and that's perfectly all right. I did a video on it, as you may know, that tries to mirror the structure of the novel. So that video, I'd say, it's either, an unredeemable mess or the best video that I had ever done. So let me refer you to that video for more on one of the most important Argentine novels ever written. Next we have the great 62 Modelo para Armar. 62, A Model Kit is the title in English, from 1968. This novel, what it tries to do is to put to practice an idea that Cortázar described in the 62nd chapter of Rayuela, hence the title. This is a transgressive novel in the best sense of the term. It's a text that is free from the conventions of narrative and from psychological causality when it comes to the ways in which the characters behave. So the characters here seem to respond to forces, if you will, that are beyond their understanding. Now, as I've said before, this may not be Cortázar's most important novel. That would definitely be Rayuela. But to me, it is his best novel, his masterpiece. And I will always call it that, I think, unless I change my mind radically when it comes to Cortázar's novels. And then we have a novel from 1973, and that is Libro de Manuel, or A Manual for Manuel, as it was translated into English. This is Cortázar's political novel. Now, personally, I am not a very big fan of political literature, though of course, you could say that in a way all literature may be political. That's another story and a very complex issue. But I do want to say this. Cortázar had good intentions when it comes to this novel. He said that because dictatorships control information, many people in Latin America were not fully aware of what was happening there during this time. I'm referring, of course, to the kidnappings, the tortures, the executions, and all that. So what he said was, I'm a best-selling author. If I write a novel about this, maybe that's a way or a vehicle to convey the truth so that people will know the facts. So that was his intention when he wrote this one. This is a great example of pastiche. It includes newspaper pieces, for example. It includes poetry, statistics, many other types of text that are included within the novel. And the general idea, if you're looking for a kind of a plot description, this is a manual for life for a little kid who's one of the characters named Manuel. So the idea here is that this little kid will someday encounter this book of Manuel and read about all these things that were happening in the world and be able to make good decisions when it comes to creating, or paving the way for a new world. So those were the novels that Cortázar published during his lifetime. But then we have a couple of posthumous pieces, and the one that I enjoyed the most was this one. It's a little novel, maybe a novella. I would have to reread it in order to tell you if the structure works as a novella. But Divertimento was published in 1986, but it was actually written in 1949, so that would make it Cortázar's first novel. It is very brief, but really interesting, really memorable. You already see the group of friends at the center of the story. And the ones here who are also a group of people like the ones in Rayuela or in 62, they gather at a painter studio to talk about literature and about art and history and politics and things like that. So what the title suggests, if you look at that, right, Divertimento, is a light piece. But this is actually a very deep text. I was pleasantly surprised by this one. And the other one that was published posthumously in the novelistic genre was El Examen, or Final Exam. This one was published in 1986, but it was written in 1950. That would make it Cortázar's second novel that he wrote. We see in this one a group of friends wandering in Buenos Aires in the fog and in the rain. And what Cortázar does here is he creates a sense of expectation in us as readers that is basically exasperating and even frustrating, I would say. We also have this group of friends who discuss art, literature, politics, history, etc. So you can see here that the novelistic pattern or the plan for Cortázar's novels was already there from the very beginning. Now, many people call this one a premonitory novel because they say that many of the scenes here anticipate the funeral of Eva Perón, or Evita, which happened a couple of years after the novel was written. Cortázar wrote a text for this novel in which he says that he thinks that if you look at Argentine history, it's really not that difficult, unfortunately, to be premonitory. So those are his ideas about that topic. Let me show you the way that I first experienced the short stories of Julio Cortázar. There was a little collection put together by Alianza Editorial. That's what I'm showing you right here. It was in 4 volumes. I'm going to show you volume number 4 later on because I have it in a slightly older edition, so it looks a little bit different. There was one that belonged to this same edition, but I happen to have the older one. So this book that you see right here was the first book by Julio Cortázar that I actually read consciously. This was put together by Alianza, but the selection was done by Cortázar himself. So he divided his short stories into these groups. We have Ritos, Juegos, Pasajes, and then the 4th volume is titled Ahí y Ahora, which I'm going to show you right now. You can see it's a little bit different because it's an older edition, but the contents are exactly the same. The good thing about this is if you have the 4 volumes, you have pretty much all of the short stories of Julio Cortázar, but one of the problems here is that they are not in the order that they appeared in the original books. So they're kind of mixed up. You get, different stories from different time periods. So if you don't like that, then that's not a good thing. But I was okay with this. I really enjoyed it. And that was the first, books. These were the first books that I had by Cortázar as a short story writer. So because I was missing some of the stories in that collection, just a few of them, I bought this volume later on, which was put together by Alfaguara. So Alfaguara has 2 volumes of Cuentos Completos by Cortázar. So if you have this one, then there's a second volume, and that's basically his complete short stories. And the cool thing about this one of the main reasons why I got it, was that this includes, for example, the collection La Otra Orilla, which was the first one that he wrote, but it was published posthumously. So the first one that most people read was actually Bestiario. And in Bestiario, you can already see some classics like Casa Tomada, for example, so House Taken Over, and many others. Bestiario, just so you know, is from 1951. Let me see if we can look at some other texts here. Lejana, for example, the story about a doppelganger. Circe, that was the first short story by Cortázar that I read. So his first collection was actually already very good. And then after that one, the next one that he published was Final del Juego. Here there's a little bit of a discrepancy when it comes to the publication, because Las Armas Secretas came after Final del Juego. Final del Juego is from 1956, so you have to keep in mind that sometimes there's a little bit of a difference when it comes to that. Final del Juego has Continuidad de los Parques. This one, El Río, is actually very good. Los Venenos, I really like that one too. These are underrated stories by Cortázar. And it continues right here with such classics as Axolotl and La Noche Boca Arriba, one of the best Cortázar short stories ever. The Night Face Up, right? And Final del Juego, which is also another personal favorite of mine. And then you would have to go back to Las Armas Secretas, which is from 1959. Las Babas del Diablo, that is good old Blow Up in English. El Perseguidor, the Pursuer, so Cortázar's novella. So you can see there are many good stories right here. Then what I like about this book is that it includes Historias de Cronopios y de Famas, but I'm going to tell you more about that when the time comes, because I believe that that is a different type of genre for Cortázar. It's not really a short story collection in the traditional sense of the term. So after that, we have from 1966, Todos los Fuegos el Fuego. And this is also a really good one. I mean, look at the titles. La Autopista del Sur, The Southern Thruway, The Health of the Sick, my favorite Cortázar short story ever, Nurse Cora, another classic, The Other Heaven, El Otro Cielo. So this was volume number 1. And let me show you so that we can continue looking at the collections separately. I'm going to show you another book that was put together by the publisher Punto de Lectura, or the collection Punto de Lectura. So let's see if I can show you the table of contents here so that we can look at other collections. So we ended the other one with Todos los Fuegos el Fuego, which you can see here. Then they include 3 stories from a collection titled Último Round. I'm going to show you that book in a second because it's also a different genre. And the next collection of stories then that we have would be Octaedro from 1974. There are some great stories here, but not Cortázar's best known, I would say. For example, the first one in Octaedro, Liliana Llorando, is one of my favorite also Cortázar stories. I don't think I featured it in my... No, I did not. I did not feature it in my video on the best Cortázar short stories because there were others that had precedence over that one. But Liliana Llorando is probably my favorite from Octaedro, which is, as the title suggests, 8 stories. The next one is Alguien que anda por ahí, from 1977, and this is the one in which you can already begin to see a more political leaning when it comes to the content of Cortázar's fiction. So not so much fantasy anymore, but committed type of literature. For example, in the short story Apocalipsis de Solentiname, and many others. But there are still, short stories that deal with the good old topics that Cortázar talks about for the most part. It's just that there was a new type of leaning, as I was saying before. So that's one of the volumes. And then we have, from that same collection, or that same publisher, they had this one, Cuentos Completos número 3, which was the last one, actually. And this one begins with the collection. This is a great one also. Actually, it begins with Un Tal Lucas, but I'm going to tell you about that later on, because I also think that that doesn't belong to this genre specifically. But this one, if we look at the short story collections, begins with Queremos tanto a Glenda. We love Glenda so much, from 1980. Great collection also. The short story itself, We Love Glenda So Much, is one of Cortázar's best, definitely. And Texto en una libreta, that one is one of my favorites also by him. You can also see political short stories here. For example, Graffiti. Graffiti is a political short story by him. And the last collection of short stories by Cortázar, which is from 1982, is of course this one that we have right here, Deshoras. Botella al Mar is that story that he wrote in which he mentions Glenda Jackson. making reference to We Love Glenda So Much, of course. La Escuela de Noche, one of my favorite stories by him. I talked about that one in that video that I did on Cortázar's best short stories. And his whole short story output ends really well with this Diario para un Cuento, which is that famous story in which Cortázar says, I would like to be Bioy Casares. So I highly recommend that short story if you haven't had the chance to read it. So as I was telling you before, those are the short story collections that Cortázar published during his lifetime. But if you want to look at the first one that he actually wrote, you would have to go back to this collection and look at the one titled La Otra Orilla, so The Other Shore. These are very interesting, okay? Some of them, he calls them plagios, because he is very obviously dealing with, influence here. And I think in my previous collection, the one from Alianza Editorial, they included one story from this original first collection, which, by the way, these were stories written between 1937 and 1945. We're talking really early, but it was published for the first time in 1994. This one right here, Estación de la Mano. It's a little bit Kafkaesque. It's really short. So if you want to give a shot to one of the stories that Cortázar wrote early on, if you cannot read Spanish, but you can still try, translating it as you go, because it's really short, as you can see, only 4 pages long. This one is really good. And he thought it was good enough to rescue for that other collection that I showed you before. So that tells you something. And we're going to go back to this volume, believe it or not, because we are talking about those collections of microfiction or flash fiction. That is why I was saying that I believe, for example, that Historias de Cronopios y de Famas, Cronopios and Famas, as it is known in English, does not really belong to the short story genre, because these are very, very short pieces that deal with the same topic, namely these creatures known as Cronopios and Famas. And you can see there are so many of them. You have all those famous instructions on how to cry, instructions on how to go up the stairs, for example. Ocupaciones Raras, which is another part of that book. And you can see how many of them there are, all of these dealing with the same topic and the same type of characters. So that would be one example of those collections of flash fiction or microfiction. And the other one is, of course, one of the funniest books that I have read by Cortázar, which is Un Tal Lucas. In the previous example, we had a group of creatures, the Cronopios. In this case, we have a guy, just a regular guy, a certain Lucas. This is from 1979. Historias de Cronopios y de Famas was from 1962. So we are talking about quite a while later. And he analyzes this character of Lucas, who is really hilarious at times, and all of his different aspects in this collection. So those are the two examples that Cortázar gave us of collections of microfiction or flash fiction, and they are both hilarious. This shows really Cortázar at his best as a humorous writer. So that's why I like them so much. It is very difficult to categorize some of Cortázar's works, so it's convenient to put them in the category of miscellaneous works. One of the best examples of that would be La Vuelta al Día en 80 Mundos, which plays, of course, with the title of the Jules Verne novel. And these include photographs, all kinds of images, and all kinds of texts, poetry, and all that. I have this edition right here that was really difficult to find back in the time when I was able to buy it in Buenos Aires. It comes in 2 volumes. But originally, the way that Cortázar wanted to publish it was close to this that you see right here. I found this at Half Price Books many years later. It was not expensive at all, and I thought to myself, I should get a copy of that, because this is the format in which these books were intended to appear in the first place. They include all of the art, all of the drawings and photographs, and all of those things that Cortázar wanted to have accompany these texts. So that is La Vuelta al Mundo en 80 La Vuelta al Día en 80 Mundos, Around the Day in 80 Worlds from 1967. And the other book that is a type of a sister volume to that one, I would call it, is of course Último Round, or Last Round, which also has an edition that is different from this. What I'm showing you right here is the pocket edition. So there's another one, but I don't really have that one. This is the one that I was able to find. It was difficult enough to find this, and it also has lots of texts and drawings and poems and all sorts of things, really. These are really showing you Cortázar at his freest, I would say, as an author, and also as a visual author, because he liked his stories and his texts to be very visual. Then also under that miscellaneous category, I would include Prosa del Observatorio. This is a book of prose poetry accompanied by photographs that Cortázar took of the Jantar Mantar, so the observatory of the Maharaja Jai Singh from the late 17th and early 18th centuries. This is located, the observatory, in the city of Jaipur. And as a trivia, the observatory is also featured in Tarsem's great film from 2006, The Fall. So it's the same observatory that you see here. This is a really good book by Cortázar that not many people read, so I believe this is really an underrated text. Next in this category, I have Silvalandia, a collaboration with the artist Julio Silva. So the drawing that you can see here, this book is full of them, right? So you can see the drawings by Julio Silva accompanied by the texts by Cortázar. So they were very good friends, and they collaborated in this great little book. It's really tiny, so you can read it in a few minutes only. So you have this series of drawings accompanied by texts by Cortázar, and all I can say about it really is that it is simply beautiful. I enjoyed it very much. Then we have Los Autonautas de la Cosmopista. This is from 1983. The previous one, by the way, Silvalandia, is from 1975. So this book right here is also an underrated piece in Cortázar's work. It has been translated into English, The Autonauts of the Cosmo Route, I want to say. So it turns out that in May of 1982, Cortázar and his wife Carol Dunlop decided to take a trip on the Southern Thruway. Yes, you know, the same one that is featured in one of Cortázar's greatest short stories. And they wanted to spend 33 days traveling from Paris to Marseille on this Southern Thruway. Now, there was a problem. Apparently, there was a law saying that a car could not be on the thruway for more than 2 days. So what they did was they wrote a letter to get permission to be there for 33 days without getting out of this thruway. They did not receive a response. It's a really long story that Cortázar tells us in an introduction to this. And Cortázar called the whole idea, he called it una expedición un tanto alocada y bastante surrealista. So this is their travelogue. It's their experience. It's a crónica, I would say, of this journey, this 33 days that they spent on the thruway. It has lots of pictures. It's really amazing. And the ending itself, it includes a postscript. And I would say that that is one of the most heartbreaking texts that I have ever read. And I wanted to finish this section right here of the miscellaneous books with a book that was published in 2009. So this gathers texts that were written between 1940 and 1984, so it covers basically the entirety of Cortázar's life as an author, but it was published in 2009. It's a collection of texts that had never been published before. So it includes short stories, variations of texts that already existed, more stories about the Cronopios and the Famas, and also about Lucas, episodes that had not appeared before from those collections. There's also a chapter from Libro de Manuel. There are speeches, prologues, poems, and also, you know, in typical Cortázar fashion, pieces that do not fall under any category. So it was quite an event when this was published, I remember, because we are talking about 25 years exactly after Cortázar's death. So that is Papeles Inesperados. Cortázar wrote plays? Yes, he did, my friend. He wrote plays right here. And I'm going to show you two books that gather all of his dramatic output. This one is Los Reyes from 1949. It's the first book that Cortázar published under his real name, actually, because before this one he was Julio Denis. It's a dramatic poem about the myth of the Minotaur, as the image there suggests, but with a twist. Okay, because in this one, Ariadne is not in love with Theseus, but with the monster who lives in the labyrinth. So this really has Cortázar written all over it, doesn't it? It's that great thing that he would have done with this story. It's really interesting, and it's a really quick read. I don't know if you can tell from the image right here, but it's very brief. And the other book that includes his plays is this one, this collection right here, Adiós Robinson y otras piezas breves. So if you have these two books, you have all of the plays that Cortázar wrote. There are three pieces in this one. The first one is poetic. The second one has elements of the theater of the absurd. And the third one, which is Adiós Robinson, is a type of political allegory dealing, of course, with Robinson Crusoe and Friday. As you may know, Cortázar translated Robinson Crusoe at one point. So this was a very important influence in his life. This book was published in 1995, and the pieces are light, really, for the most part, but they're interesting because this is an aspect of Cortázar's work that not many people are familiar with. So it does have that attractive element to it. Cortázar as a poet is, of course, more well known than Cortázar as a playwright. And most of his poems, I believe, the majority of them, maybe all of them, are gathered in this volume titled Salvo el Crepúsculo, or Save Twilight in English. This is from 1984, and it's interesting because this is the last book that Cortázar published in his lifetime. It's a personal gathering or anthology of his poetry, and it is really all over the place. It's just a poetic explosion that includes plenty of quotes, epigraphs, handwritten texts, lots of things, anything you can imagine, it's here. And it really proves what every reader of Cortázar already knows, even before they have read a single line of his poetry, which is basically that Cortázar was a true poet. And I mean that in every sense of the word. So even though I had a category titled miscellaneous, believe it or not, we are talking about Cortázar, right? So there are books that do not even fall into that category. So that's what I'm going to show you right now. The first one is Imagen de John Keats. This was written in 1951 and 1952, but it was published in 1996. So it's another one of those posthumous publications. Cortázar was just a very big fan of John Keats. So what he did was he wrote a 600-page book on him, which is what I'm showing you right here. This, he said, is not a biography. It's not an essay, but he calls it a dialogue with the great poet. It's an exorbitant text. Okay, it's just a beautiful mess all over the place. And as usual, I would say that, you know how it is. What A tells you about B tells you more about A than it does about B, right? That is almost always the case. So the good thing about this is that it not only tells you a lot about John Keats, but it really tells you a whole lot about Cortázar himself. So that is part of the great value of this text right here. And then I have from 1975, Fantomas contra los vampiros multinacionales. It's a political novella / comic book, as you can tell by the cover. And in the story, what happens is that books are disappearing or being burnt. So this is a job for Fantomas. It's both humorous and deeply serious because of the subject matter. And it's a minor work, but I would say it was really a pleasant surprise. I was not expecting it to be that good based on the topic and the approach. I also have Diario de Andrés Fava from 1995. This is when it was published, but actually Andrés Fava is a character from El Examen, or Final Exam, so we are talking about a text from 1950. This is the diary, really, of that character from El Examen, and it was going to be part of the novel, but Cortázar decided to exclude it. It contains just brilliant impressions and reflections on literary works, ideas for text to be written, so that is really valuable if you ask me. and just comments on life and much, much more. It is really brief. Okay, we are talking about less than 200 pages, but I found it to be one of Cortázar's richest and most personal texts. So this one was really important for me as a reader, and I wanted to show you also this great book by him towards the end of this journey. But the very last one that I have is this, that a very good friend, a very kind soul, sent me from Buenos Aires many years ago. This was published in 2014, okay, and it is titled Cortázar de la A a la Z, un álbum biográfico. And it is just that. It is a fascinating photo album and encyclopedia of Cortázar. We really go from the A to the Z, so the book covers topics that were important in the context of Cortázar's work, and it also includes relevant excerpts from his work for each of these topics, okay, including things from his letters. So that is really nice also. There are plenty of photographs too. Including like personal photographs that had not appeared before. For example, you find here pictures of his passport or his national ID card from Argentina. So it's really, really a valuable resource. I highly recommend it. If you can get a copy of this, even if you do not speak Spanish, this is going to give you great insight into the work and the life of Julio Cortázar. So on that wonderful note, our journey comes to an end. So there you have it, my Julio Cortázar collection, sort of. There are two things that I was not able to show you. I have 3 volumes of his letters. That was the 3-volume edition. Later on, another edition, an expanded one, was released that included his letters in 5 volumes, but I just have the 3-volume edition. And then the other thing that I have is his Obra Crítica, so his literary criticism in 3 volumes. The reason why I could not show you these books is because they are in a storage and I don't really know where they are. So if I ever find them, I will come back here and I will show you those books by Julio Cortázar also. What's missing? There are many books missing here, believe it or not. For example, Buenos Aires, Buenos Aires, Nicaragua tan violentamente dulce, Ceremonias, Alto el Perú, Viaje alrededor de la mesa. So he was a very prolific author, and these books are very difficult to find. But what I showed you are his major works, let's put it that way. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Do you have a favorite book by Cortázar, or is there a book from the ones that I showed that you would be interested in more information about? Just let me know. So I hope you enjoyed this literary journey through the works of Julio Cortázar. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.